Another grim day in New South Wales brought 818 cases and 3 deaths. But there was also a shift in focus away from case numbers and towards vaccination numbers.
The more important figure is getting those vaccination rates up and not going through the emotional roller coaster every day.
It was a similar story in Victoria, which had 71 new cases.
70 and 80% will mean we have many more choices, many more options, and they're all better than the very challenging circumstances that we face now.
And ahead of this week's socially distanced sitting of Parliament, the PM was again banging the drum for his reopening plan.
We've agreed a national plan at 70 and 80% based on the best possible medical advice, best possible scientific advice, and best possible economic advice. It puzzles me why anyone would want to go against a plan that has been so carefully prepared based on that advice.
But for currently COVID-free states, the spiralling Delta outbreak has changed the equation.
We're signed up and committed to the plan that National Cabinet endorsed, but that was a plan that was endorsed before the New South Wales outbreak.
Just because the New South Wales government has made a mess of it doesn't mean the rest of us should suffer. The modelling should be redone, as was agreed at Friday's meeting, because the modelling is out of date. Everyone agreed the modelling is out of date.
That original Doherty Institute modelling shows even an initial 30 to 100 cases could overwhelm our test, trace, isolate and quarantine response, leading to 1,700 deaths within 6 months, even at 80% vaccination. But as New South Wales closes in on 1,000 cases a day, the PM is adamant the current modelling still stacks up.
And that's the advice that I have, Mr Speaker. That advice confirmed just over the weekend. As we continue to work with the Doherty Institute, if we're not to open up at 70% and 80%, then when? When is that going to happen? At what point?
Liberal MP Dr Katie Allen joins us now. Gosh, so much to talk about, Katie. It's all very well to have a reopening plan, but what's the point if you can't get all of the state premiers on board?
Well, that is true. I think that the point about the national plan is that they did agree to the national plan based on the Doherty modelling, which Professor Sharon Lewin has just reiterated today, that modelling does take into account different levels, whether it's 30 cases or 800 cases. It does take that into account. It just means you're further along the curve. And we always know that the modelling also takes into account different levels of restrictions. And so there is this issue that as we move through this transition out of lockdown, which all Australia wants to get to, that we will still have some restrictions. And it's about agreeing to what those restrictions are so that we can have some national consistency. But of course, as we know throughout COVID, the states have had their own views on those particular restrictions, but at the end of the day, they have agreed to moving forward. And once we get to that 70% and then the 80%, there are specific issues within those different 70 and 80% targets that will help communities open up slowly.
The modelling, as I understand it, though, wasn't based on Delta, and you have Mark McGowan in WA saying that the modelling's out of date. We all agreed it was out of date at National Cabinet. Clearly, something is very different about the way the virus moves now than previously. So doesn't it stand to reason that the modelling is actually out of date and has to be redone?
No, that's actually not correct. The modelling does include the Delta variant. I actually specifically spoke to the experts about this because that was my concern originally when the Doherty modelling came out. So we do know both the Grattan Institute and the Doherty modelling has been both based on the Delta variant, and it is based on a highly transmissible variant, which is 2 to 3 times higher than the Alpha variant. So all that modelling has been done. Nothing really has changed except we're further up the curve, and it does mean that as we move forward, we know that there's going to be more cases, and that modelling has taken that assumption into account. So I don't believe that is correct information.
So what are you going to say to someone like Mark McGowan? He's sitting there presiding over a state with 0 COVID, and he's going to say, look, you can do what you want, but why would I open my border to that? Why would I let that in, even at levels of vaccination, and watch people die?
Well, it is interesting when you look to New Zealand. They've got an outbreak there that they're struggling with at the moment. I would say that Mark McGowan is in a situation that's different from the rest of Australia, and perhaps he's going to go it alone. But what I would say is I think all Australians want all of Australia to get to the other side. We cannot stay locked down forever. People are putting their arm forward and getting vaccinated in massive numbers. 215 vaccinations per minute now. It's like record levels. People have really got the message. Get the vaccination that's right for you, that you're eligible for, and go and book in and do it now.
Delta is different. It's got into the schools, it's infecting children. What are we going to do about keeping schools open or closed, given that we're not going to have our children vaccinated?
That's a very good point, and I've been working very hard with experts right across the spectrum, but I really welcome the Murdoch Children's Research Institute report today. And what it backs in is that the highly transmissible age group is the 20 to 40-year-old age group. That was from the Doherty modelling itself. And we know that we need to vaccinate that age group as a priority, but they're also the parents, carers and teachers of children, and we don't yet have a vaccine for the under 12s. There is studies going on to look at whether these vaccines are okay for the under 12, but nowhere in the world has approved the under 12 vaccine. So we believe, and so does the Murdoch, that the current plan, which is to vaccinate the 20 to 40-year-olds as a priority, as a transmissible group, is a great way to protect our kids as well. And that will help us get to the next level, which is to help open up our schools, because in my home state of Victoria, there's been 146 days when kids haven't been able to have face-to-face learning. And I'd like to see COVID-safe protocols helping those kids get back to school, because the shadow pandemic is taking an effect, particularly in Victoria. It's hard for others to know how hard it's been going through 2 sets of lockdown. Our VCE students haven't known until just on Friday whether they were going to be able to sit their VCE exams. And in Victoria, that VCE cohort have had 2 years of lockdowns affecting their educational outcomes.
Yeah, it's certainly tough, Katie. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Surely we've got to vaccinate the teenagers. Like, you can't... Can you open up? I get the under 12s. We're not there yet. But I just don't understand how you can open up, have everyone, kids moving between schools, not vaccinated.
Yeah. Well, you can't. You've got to vaccinate them or you can't open the schools. So the bottom line is we're not going to be opening the schools because we don't have enough vaccination to vaccinate all of those children as quickly as we need to. Schools are not going to open between now and the end of the year.
You don't think?
Well,
No.
they are, though. Scott Morrison did say yesterday that they're looking at the 12 and up vaccination, I think, National Cabinet on Friday. So that process is already starting. So I don't know about amounts of vaccine. We do have a lot of vaccine around, but it's a question of whether or not the Atagi, for example, is happy with that. But that's coming. Like, they're looking at that very quickly.
But you have your first dose, you've still got to have 3 weeks for the efficacy to kick in.
With Pfizer,
then
yeah.
you have your other... Are we talking about double dose?
Coming on now too.
Are we talking about double dose children or single dose children? What are we talking about?
I can't do that modelling for you. All I know is that they're looking at exactly those things.
With so much content online, it's sometimes hard to keep up with it all. And let's face it, who has the time? The Project YouTube has you covered with the stories that matter. Hit subscribe for a daily list of the news that you need to know.